Good evening everybody, welcome to the studio tonight. Just adjust the camera a little bit. One of these days I'll remember to do that before I go live, but at least you can tell that there's a real person at this end. Right, I shall zoom in a little bit just to make it a bit easier for you to see. But effectively we're going to be doing more on the stones around here, so that I add more texture into them, I make them a little bit brighter. We can then fill in around them the mortar like we have done here, so they don't look as much as they do now that they're sort of floating in mid-air. They actually look like they've got something connecting them. And I also want to change my glasses. That'll make it easier for me to see, which seems like a really good idea. I always forget something. Right. So I'm just going to be picking stones at random and just going around adding a little bit more texture to them. As I mentioned, that will make them brighter, and then I'll be able to increase the brightness of the mortar to compensate for that as well. And essentially at the moment most of these stones are just done with lines in a single direction, and that kind of makes them look slightly unnatural when you look at them in person. And for anybody that's has seen what it says about this being Scraperboard but doesn't actually understand what that is, Scraperboard is an artistic medium. It's made up of 3 layers. There's a backing board of some kind. In this particular case it's a thin card, which is then covered with porcelain clay and then has a layer of Indian ink applied over the top. To create the image, you then use anything that's sharp to scrape through the black Indian ink to reveal the white clay underneath. The more scratches, the wider the scratch or the deeper the scratch in a particular area, the lighter it will look, and that's how you get the different brightnesses that you're seeing from all the different stones and components around here. Now you can get a Scraperboard that does have, instead of porcelain clay, it does have other things. Silver foil, gold foil, copper coloured foil are just 3. Obviously they produce a different effect when you scrape through them. The silver foil is particularly effective if you want to do night or moonlight scenes, because you get the silvery effect of moonlight. And the copper is very good for like sunset type views where you've got a red tinge to lots of things, and gold's just gold. You can also get multicoloured stuff, but that's less an art. I want to say less an artistic medium. That's not quite right. It's less used for photorealistic type images than it is used for colourful looking images. So there's yeah, you can get like rainbow effects, or you can get like a holographic, lots of sparkly colour type effects from that. So they can be very nice for different things. I said you can use any sharp object, which is indeed true. Knife, penknife, hypodermic needle, razor blade, special tools like this particular one here are available. I was also trying to think of a scalpel, a pin, edge of a piece of glass, just literally anything that will has a sharp edge. It doesn't take much force, but it does take a sort of a sharp item to get through the black coating here to form the image. And various tools produce different sort of effects. There is a tool which is called a fiberglass pencil, which produces very good for hair-like textures, long, thin, light strokes. Wire brushes can be used as well. They produce quite heavy, literally wiry looking things. Quite good for areas of grass or something like that, where you're actually seeing the grass stalks. You can also use sandpaper, for example. That's sharp enough to get through the black Indian ink. Most of those I haven't actually tried that, so it's not I'm not speaking from experience there. That's just researchers' available tools and what sort of effects they may produce. Okay, this one's a bit. I don't really need to do anything quite. I mean, you might have difficulty seeing it, but the marks that I'm making here are quite light. They're spaced reasonably far apart, and they're really thin lines. But as you can see, as I'm doing this, the brightness increases quite considerably when I just add just a few lines to something, and it can really make a little bit of it show up quite a lot. So it is something. Sometimes you don't, when you're doing this, you don't go at it too strongly, otherwise things start to look like they're really bright, really white, and that is often an effect that you don't actually want. You want them to be quite subtle. It's easy to be loud and brash if you've been subtle to start with, but it's a bit harder to go the other way. You start having to use correcting inks, another black Indian ink or black ink over the top to correct things if you've gone too white for what you're trying to do. So I'm trying to, as I mentioned, trying to lighten these stones up a little bit, make sure I define the edges a little bit better. That makes it easier for the mortar, you to see the edges of the mortar. But also just add texture. In most cases, with the lines all going in a single direction of the original scrapings that are made here, then they tend not to look quite so realistic. They sort of need at least cross-hatching or something in other random directions, just to stop your eye following the individual lines and not seeing them quite as stones. I'm not being geometric or anything particularly even about making these scratch marks. Generally speaking, it doesn't need it, but I'm also trying, the stone texture on the surface is somewhat of a random one. It's just where the stone happens to have broken, either when it was hit or has occurred naturally. So I am quite happy if some areas of it look lighter than others. That's portraying the natural surface of the stone. Also, not going around in any particular order, just wherever I happen to feel like trying next. That is done on purpose. It assists in not getting too used to what you're seeing. If you get used to what you're looking at, you start to fail to see things that don't quite fit. You start to see what you expect to see. So by dotting around and coming back to areas, I get a new perspective on that particular area, which helps me see things with a little bit more fresh eyes, and therefore I'll pick up on things that might otherwise be considered mistakes, and I get a chance to correct them. You'll also see me looking up. What I'm doing is looking at the output from this particular camera here, this one that's pointing straight down, and by doing that I'm getting a view which is the equivalent of me getting up and taking a few steps back. It just saves me doing that, and so when I'm looking upwards, as I'm doing now, I'm actually watching the output from this camera. That allows me to see, as I say, a little bit better. Now the stones around here just under the thatch, I do want to be darker anyway. They're going to be in shadow, or largely in shadow, because the thatch is coming over the top of them. So I have to be a little bit careful not to make those as white as the ones around it. I want those, as I say, to be in a shadow, so they will naturally be dimmer. Now the stones that are just around this window here I think look really good in person, and they don't look too bad on the camera as well. I like the textures, I like the way they curl around the corner. I'm going to leave those alone. I know there's one down here which is dark. I'm not sure whether I'm going to make that part of the path or part of the house. Similar with this one here, which kind of looks like it's overlapping that one. I'm leaving those for the moment, we can always come back to those. So I think largely speaking there's a few around here which will just make a little bit brighter. And largely speaking they're all now fairly light. It looks like I've got one down here that could do with being a little bit more well defined. Yeah, that should do. So what we can do now basically is now go around and increase the brightness of the mortar. Now all that really is a case of doing is there's already lots of fine scratches between them. So what I need to do now is just add more into that same space, and that will increase the brightness of that mortar. Make it more visible, and in making it more visible it will then of course start to tie the stones together. All I'm doing just off camera here at the moment is just filing this tool. Surprising as it may be, the scratching through this Indian ink does actually quite rapidly blunt sharp tools. So rather than replacing it, and I probably would have gone through 3 or 4 of these just nibs on this particular piece already, I'm a little bit of a cheapskate, and so I file the tips. It's working just as well, and I don't have to replace them just as much. I guess at some point I will, but I will then have saved quite a bit of pennies. As I start to work my way around these stones, what you will see, or should see, is the areas get lighter around them. You've seen this area I've started working, isn't it? You should now be able to see the grey area between the stones. Now if you're watching and would like to ask any questions, you're quite welcome to do so. You do need to be logged into Twitch in order to be able to ask questions though. We're not able to do that anonymously, I'm sorry. And if you want to ask any questions about any of the other arts and crafts that I do on stream, you're also quite welcome to do that. If you don't know what else I do, there's a list. We have Scraperboard, Punchcraft, which is kind of like miniature rug making, relief carving with hand tools, pyrography, which is creating pictures on wood with heat, and jewellery, making jewellery with rings. So pretty bracelets, necklaces, that sort of thing. So five different things there, all of which we do on stream, generally in a rotation order. So we'll finish a piece in one art form and then move on to a different one. So we've just finished some pyrography before we started doing this image, and before that we were doing some carving. Next, once this is finished, we'll probably move on to doing some punchcraft, which will be about a week's worth of stream, and then on to some jewellery making, and then probably back to carving. So quite a variety if you keep watching. If you are new and you're also wondering why I'm wearing white gloves, as some people do, that is quite literally to keep finger marks off the black surface. The skin oils do sometimes, well, they will get on the surface if you're not using gloves. They can be wiped off. It's not they're not detrimental, or generally speaking, they're not detrimental to the piece. It just saves doing so. They also sort of reflect quite a bit of light, so it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to see if you've got lots of finger marks on there. So that's another reason for wearing the gloves, and also that it's nice and easy to sort of just clean off. As I'm doing this, I'm scraping the black ink off. I'm effectively creating black dust, which, if I leave it on the surface, will actually embed itself into the white areas and create a slightly darker tone. And actually, as I'm wiping it off, I'm doing a little bit of that, but not too much. That incidentally actually is a valid technique for changing some of the tones being used. But generally speaking, I'm just cleaning it off for the moment, and that's where the black marks on the gloves are coming from, wiping off the black Indian ink. The ink itself isn't water soluble, so if you do get it on your the dust on your hands, for example, it just washes off. Also isn't a great deal of it. I've done 3 pieces now, or 2 boards this size, and that's just from 2 boards. I'm not putting any water down here just for the moment. The intention was to make that look a bit like the rocks were starting to break away a little bit. May change my mind on that, but for the moment I'm just leaving it blank. I can fill it in afterwards. Whenever I'm doing things like this, I always like to leave the options open if I can. If I'm not quite decided on something, then I try not to close off the options that I've got available to me. Like if I put mortar in here and then decide I don't want it, I've got to get the correcting ink out to get rid of the marks. If I don't put them in, I don't have to do that. I can always add them again afterwards if I change my mind. Now, one of the ways in which the tips gets blunted is as you're moving it across the porcelain clay, the tip of the tool is actually kind of like a fine spike. And as you're moving it across the clay, that tip has a tendency to bend very much like a finger. So it doesn't dig in quite so much when you as you keep working. And gradually it gets more and more bend. It's a very fine tip, so it doesn't take long for that to happen. And it's effectively like the tool is blunt. It's really, relatively speaking, quite hard to make a mark and to make a scratch. You end up using too much pressure, and then you get a whiter line than you want. So the easiest way to correct that, at least for a while, is to work, instead of working in one direction, to change the direction and work in the other. You then start to catch that sharp point again, and gradually it bends straight and then bends the other way until it starts to go blunt again. Of course, naturally most people have an affinity for working in one direction, left to right, for example, for a right-handed person. Working the other way can sometimes be more challenging. There isn't as much control, and that is one thing that I have not as much control working right to left, so it's something I need to practice. Conveniently, I'm forced to do so in this particular case, but what I have to be very careful of is I do tend to make a more bolder mark going right to left than I do left to right, so I have to be very careful with pressure in doing this, because I don't want there to be any difference from marks made one way to marks made going the other way. I want any difference in the bits of mortar to be because I wanted them to be different, not because I couldn't make a fine enough mark because I'm working in the opposite direction. So a lot of art is all about practice, trying out different techniques and just repeating them. And repeating them enables you to get better at doing them. And then your artwork improves as you practice more. Okay, so those areas are now starting to fill in. So this point it's not an particularly exciting part of the artwork, in that the changes that are going on are really subtle, but it is a necessary part of the artwork. Without this, the final image would not look as good as I am hoping it will. But this is where artwork is time consuming to do because of these details, these little bits. It's these little bits that make something look absolutely fantastic as opposed to just okay. So one of the things I do hope I'm sort of showing here is that when you get an artist like me, if you like, that's saying this is taking sort of 60, 80, whatever, 100 hours or something, you got an idea from watching now that that's not just a number that's being picked out of somebody's head, or a reason to make it sort of look, artworks when they're priced relatively expensively quite a lot of the time, because there's a lot of hours go into doing the work, and you can see it's where that sort of time comes from. Now around here, as I said, I wanted to keep these stones more or less as they were because I like them. So what I'm going to do is be even lighter in adding in these extra scratches, because I still want to brighten the mortar around them, but I don't want to make the mortar lighter than the stones. Now it might look a little bit odd with the artwork at a funny angle here, or funny angle to you. I've turned it around because it's a more natural angle for my arm to work in. I want to do straight lines, but the natural pivot point for your hand is either the wrist here or your elbow, either of which, I mean, if you want to do straight lines along here, the page needs to be turned onto one side. So rather than trying to sort of do a line with no support, I can put a wrist down and pivot on my wrist, which allows me to do a lot lighter lines, have a lot more control, and to be honest, get them a lot straighter because of that than if I've got my arm floating in midair trying to do a line without any form of support. One of those tricks if you're trying to do straight lines or large areas. If you support your arm or your wrist, you'll have a lot more success. As I get up towards again these stones that are underneath the thatch, I mentioned that they're darker because they're in shadow, so is the mortar, and again that means I've got to be a lot lighter around that sort of area. The nature of what I'm doing here means that it's quite okay for me to go over the edge of the stones, which is quite nice because it means it's a lot easier to get right up to the edge of them because I've gone over the edge of them, and that means I don't leave little black lines around them as I've tried to get just to the edge and not quite managed it. So again, because the stones, natural sort of surface going over the edge, if the edge is a little bit brighter, it's not really a problem. Now just around this big stone here, looks a little bit dark on mortar, and down in this big area here as well. So I need to add a little few more scratches to those areas. Now already around this area I do have a lot of very fine scratches. They're extremely fine though, so they're show up as really quite dark. It's just a matter of scratching just a little bit either deeper or wider. Effectively, if I go deeper with a V-shaped tool, they get wider as well. So it's a sort of combined effect of both. Now they should look less, yeah, they do. They look a lot more uniform now, less darkness. A little bit of darkness isn't too bad. It's obviously, as I keep mentioning, it's natural stone. There'll be natural variations in just how much mortar there is around the various stones. So slight variations are okay, heavy variations probably not. That would either signify an area of mortar's dropped away, like down here for example, or it would also potentially the mortar is a lot deeper for some reason. Chosen07, thank you very much for that, and welcome to the studio this evening. Nice to see you around. Do you do any form of artwork yourself? So I've done a fair bit around this area. I need to now continue around this area here. Again, just brightening up the mortar. Oops, sorry, I keep knocking the camera. I think I'd do it just sharpening this a little bit. Okay, Chosen7. It's just a different skill set. I understand, you know, the difference. I don't often work with Photoshop. I usually work with Painter. and I'm not as good in Painter as I am with physical stuff. There are very similar skills in both. It's just how can I say, a pencil reacts differently on screen to when it to on a paper, for example. So although the feel of using a pen on a tablet or a screen is broadly similar, there are sort of different techniques that you get used to. You know, it's fairly easy to get a wider pencil or a pen or paintbrush in Painter or Photoshop. It's not as easy to get that on paper, and things like gradients, for example, or filling in an area takes I would say it takes more practice than on screen, because if you work with it on screen in the same way, it still takes practice to shade in an area with a pencil, for example, as it does on paper. But there are distinct advantages. Of course, you can cheat on screen. You can just say, fill this area for me, if you wanted to do that, or you've got the undo key, which helps enormously. But it's really just all about practice. But sometimes, you know, I know paint shop or photo paint shop or Painter, they're extremely great for the fact that the materials don't cost you anything, which is fantastic when you're practicing, or even there's no mess at all. I'm not sure. I do airbrushing, but I'm not sure I'd want to get into oil painting, for example. That always strikes me as being rather messy and needing a lot of cleaning up. But when you do that on the screen, it's really easy to clean up. Yeah, it's an odd thing, isn't it? How it's similar but it's different, and it's a real hard thing to explain, because you know, when you use a pen on a tablet, it feels like a pen or a pencil, and to some extent it can feel like a brush as well, especially if you change the tips to have a different tip in. These pens, you've got a variety of tips. They feel different, they react different when they're on a tablet or a screen, and it can feel a little bit like a brush, but it's that very you know, I say things like with a pen like this, when you're shading in, it's different. But anyway, both are fun, both produce equally valid art, and some really beautiful works come out of both methods. I just like creating things, so I tend to do physical stuff more than I do electronic stuff. And also, to be honest, on Twitch there's a lot of people doing electronic stuff, so I like to do something different, give you an option to see something completely different. Do you have any favourite sort of subjects that you like working on Chosen 07? I'm trying to be somewhat variable about what I do. Scraperboard, this is Scraperboard. I can say I've been quite variable in doing it, because I've only ever done 3 pieces. This is my third. So this is a building. My second one was Earthrise, so the moon's surface and the earth, and the first one was a portrait of a singer-songwriter, John Miles. So I've been quite varied. But pyrography, for example, I seem to do a lot of animals. Cats mainly, because we have cats and they make good models. But just recently did a fox, elephant, giraffe. I seem to be doing a lot of animals in pyrography. And the Punchcraft, not really sure yet. That's kind of a little bit variable, since it's been cats and a British locomotive, kind of a bit different. The detail is amazing. It looks three-dimensional even though it's 2D. I'd love to say that's a skill. It's a skill I'm developing, but I'm sure you're used to the same thing graphically as well. It's fooling your eye into seeing things that aren't there, using the different shades to make things look like they are positioned differently. So for example, the edge here, I'm sure you can see quite clearly, and you'll almost see a black line down the side there as well. It's partially there, but it's standing out more because what I'm doing is the stone edges here are lighter than the ones down there. So the light things appear to be in front of dark things, which is a slight generalization because something that's really close to you would be really dark, and things further away are mistier. So there's a slight sort of interesting sort of dilemma there. It's sort of lighter is closer to you, but so is really dark, and dark is further away from you. It's an odd thing, but that's the sort of thing that you use to make things look 3D, and trying not to, in this case I'm doing stones, so I'm trying not to be uniform about it. You have an expectation to some extent of what stones look like, and therefore you project that a little bit, but again the mortar that's around them is slightly dimmer, so you're seeing that as being slightly further away, therefore you're seeing the stones stand out to you. So it's kind of a trick in a way. This medium though is extremely good for detail because you can get some, I won't even say hairline scratches because they are finer than that. They are probably, you can get scratches that are sort of a third, quarter the size of a hair, human hair, average sort of size. They're really, really fine. But they're also very dim, so the use of fine lines is a little bit sort of limited, but you can get really extreme detail. And if you actually look at on either on YouTube or even into some of the websites where they do show scraperboard, scratchboard images, there are some absolutely fantastic images. I don't have the skill to reproduce, but they look like black and white photographs. From, you know, unless you get close enough to look at them, they're absolutely amazing photographs. Lighting, yeah. That is quite hard to do. Is the lighting thing. That can make a big difference to something as well, and the real trick is getting it right. You can get the right, well, say you get the right lighting, but if it's in the wrong direction it doesn't look right, and your eye then fills in details. This, for example, if I just let me just hold this up a little bit, the doorway here, that lighting is quite an interesting one, but it's angled such that it looks like it's the shadow that you're seeing is coming from the thatch. That's telling you roughly where the sun is, or the moon is, because I haven't decided yet what this is. But if it's casting a shadow there, you're going to get, and I haven't quite done it properly yet, but you're going to get light edges down here, for example, as well. And that's one reason why the edge of this stone would be lighter as well. So you're getting consistent imaging, which help. But yeah, no, it's challenging. But there again, if it was I was about to say, if it's dead easy, it is not always as much fun. It is for a while. It is for a while. To be able to actually do something and do it very easily is great. No, I take it back. It would be very nice to be able to do it dead easily. I could imagine if you're always able to do everything absolutely amazingly easily, it probably would get boring after a while. But to be honest, I'd like to be even half in that position. And of course, with black and white, it's all about light and the differences between the contrast between different areas that actually show you the picture that you're after. Monochrome images of all kinds always have that challenge. Colour potentially makes things easier because you can have two things that are the same brightness but different colours next to each other and they stand out. When you come in to use monochrome, the fact that they're both the same brightness, if you were just representing it in brightness, means that they'd merge together, you wouldn't be able to see them. So the trick comes in, how do you represent one different to the other? And that's the trick, and it's part of the fun of trying to produce the artwork. I shall do some more of it whilst I have a tendency sometimes to talk and not continue what I'm doing. Sometimes then I have the opposite tendency to get absorbed in the work and not say a thing at all. Yes, indeed they do, and they're a good way of trying things out. The ones that you indicated there tend to have sort of fairly, I was about to say simple geometric shapes. They're not. Sometimes they're not simple. Like a tiger, for example, is lots of scratches. But what they do is they do it in such a way that you can be really heavy-handed. They're not fine scratches. They're quite often quite thick scratches. But they have designed the image in such a way that it looks good, which of course is always good for beginners to any art form, to be able to actually produce something that they can be proud of and actually look decent is obviously a good thing. And then you can progress from there as the skill develops. To some extent, though, it's the same thing I'm doing here. I used some transfer paper to put an outline of this cottage on from a piece of paper. I didn't actually just start with a totally blank one. Well, I started with a totally blank one, used some transfer paper to put an outline on, just so I got the edges and the roof roughly where I wanted it, and the windows, rather than be twisted on the board or something like that. So I kind of made my own version of that and then worked from there. So they're and of course, even with one of those boards, you don't have to follow their lines. Ideally, you probably want to make sure you remove all of them, but even with a beginner's board, and to some extent I've got one down there which I really ought to do at some point. I got it given to me as a Christmas present. So I really ought to have a go at doing it. But you don't have to say follow lines. You can use those as guidelines, and you can, you probably want to remove the marks. Don't know whether they print them on or whether they're water soluble, so you could potentially rub them off, I don't know. But you can use that as a basis, and instead of doing big fat lines like they suggest, you can do little fine ones if that's what you want to do. And it does. I mean, that sort of experimentation is quite safe, because if they wanted you to do a fat line, you've done lots of thin ones and it doesn't look right, you can just go over and make it fat. So it's it's an option to do. But you can buy this board relatively cheaply anyway. This particular board is SD board, and it's thin. Okay, it's not much thicker than thick card or thin card, and it's a 3-layer board. You can get some. I do have some there, but you can get some Scraperboard, for example, which is about 1/4 of an inch thick. Now that's mainly the backboard, but it's significantly more expensive. So you can get Scraperboard. I think this box, I got a box with 10 sheets in it. I think A4 size like this, relatively, I'll say relatively inexpensive. It can also be cut down. It's a lot easier to cut this board because it's quite thin. So just something like a craft knife, easy enough to cut. Maybe use a ruler to get a straight line and break it into 2 pieces. I did that with my first 2 art pieces. And smaller boards are less daunting to start with, because if you really feel you've made a mess of it, you've not wasted as much material, which is what a lot of people are often worried about when they start something new. So it's a relatively cheap art form to start with. It is monochrome though, so, and it's literally, I'll say it's literally black and white, but you get grey out of it. And there are different techniques for scratching and using other tools as well, sandpaper for example. So you can have quite a varied art form. And monochrome has a charm of its own. I love doing monochrome artworks, whether it's this pyrography, which is another monochrome artwork, or even airbrushing. You can get bigger sheets as well. I mean, at some point I am hoping that I will have confidence to do something, and the space, maybe A3 or even bigger, a really nice big piece. But this is about my limit for the moment, or a half size, I have to say. This is my only ever my 3rd piece. Quite literally, I started streaming in April, and I've done a sequence of different crafts, shall we say. So I started scraperboarding on stream. So I've done all the 3 pieces that I've ever done have all been done on stream. So the first 2 were half size, and this one I had a bit more confidence to have a go at something a bit bigger. Via Reaper 7, good evening, welcome to the studio again this evening. I'm doing fine, thank you. I hope you are as well. And how's the render going? So do I Chosen 7, not only from the fact that I'm doing it, but I only discovered Creative by accident, because I used to watch an electronic artist who used to stream in the Minecraft section doing Minecraft art, and one day I noticed Creative on streaming in Creative, and what's this Creative, and went and eventually found it. I don't think I've watched another game stream since. Okay, that's a slight exaggeration, but it is quite nice. I just wish actually they were a little bit more friendly towards it and promoting it, but it's growing, and I'm sure it's going to get quite quite important to Twitch's future at some point, and be sort of a more mainstream section rather than just off to one side, which it kind of is a little bit at the moment. I look forward to seeing it for you, Reaper. I know you're keeping it secret. I hope you're not doing another. Well, no. I was about to say, I hope you're not doing another surprise thing for me. But if you are, fine. It's I don't want you just doing lots and lots of things for me. You know, do something for yourself. If yeah, but anybody else who's watching might not understand, but Fear Reaper did 2 animations for me, which he did just because he felt like it. It completely surprised me and almost had me speechless for a while when I've seen both of them. And it's I don't know if it's quite a parody, but it's sort of a take on me doing carving, I guess, because what it starts with is a block of wood from which chippings erupt quite spectacularly along its length, revealing my name, Zaragan Art, and absolutely fantastic things. Now you're not disappointing me by it's not Fear Reaper. I'm quite glad it isn't. I'd be glad if it was, and I'm glad it's not, if that makes sense, you know, because I can't use everything, and I would feel like I'd really want to. I'm not sure Amazon's got much to do with it at the moment, though. Chosen 07. It's, I mean, Amazon. Amazon, I think, bought it to compete with YouTube, because Amazon, of course, have Amazon Fire, which is their streaming platform, and Twitch and Amazon aren't really mixed. I mean, I suppose they might be offering them now computing services on the Amazon cloud, but the two really seem to be not. There's not an integration between them. Whereas you get things like Google, who've now started doing live streaming on their platform. They've got a big audience for people watching videos, so it's kind of a bit. Sorry, I'm getting my hands in the way. It's kind of a little bit sort of chicken or chicken and egg, or there was a lot of synergy there. Now, quite how it would have changed, I don't know, but you still would have sort of the audience, both audiences together. So I'm not sure, to be honest. It's really difficult to say. I mean, Google is quite an innovative company itself. I mean, if nothing else, you probably could have kept VOD's video on demand historic recordings for more than 2 weeks. But yeah, you just deal with it whichever way it went. In this case, it went to Amazon, so we shall see. I certainly haven't seen anything specifically which is you can say that is because of Amazon at the moment. Yes, indeed. I'm not quite sure how. I mean, the perception of Amazon, of course, is Amazon shopping, and their streaming services are shopping experiences almost. You know, it's like Netflix. You hire a film, or you hire audio tracks. You know, like iTunes or something like that's not iTunes because that doesn't stream yet, but some of the Spotify, something like that. You pay a subscription to get something. The linkage may come more with some different options for monetization, so people who want to try and make some money out of it. So Amazon also make money, but you know, maybe to so it's like the partners do at the moment. And I could potentially see sort of more advertising being handled by Amazon than by Twitch on its own. So you know, they get the larger estate over which advertising can be generated. So maybe there'll be some of that. But to sort of sidestep the question a little bit, Chosno7, do you do any streaming? We can't persuade Fear Reaper to do any of his 3D on stream yet, but do you do any streaming, or are you just interested in watching streams? Which I have no objection to, by the way. I watch a lot of streams. I don't. And I did before I started broadcasting, and if everybody was broadcasting and nobody was watching, we'd all be talking to ourselves. Yeah, a lot of pressure from me, Fear Reaper, because I mention it every time you come on stream. It's kind of a little bit, well, I'm intending it to be a little bit teasing at the moment. I really would like to see it at some point, but when you, or if you're comfortable with it, that's fine. If you're not, never mind. Just being a little bit careful around these stones, because I like them just as they are. I don't want to have to adjust their brightnesses so the mortar around them is slightly dimmer than around other stones. At worst, it'll give you the perception of the mortar's a little bit deeper around those stones. And again, at this edge here, I'll have mortar in shadow, so I have to be careful about just how bright I make it under the thatch edge. Now, strictly speaking, I should take into account light direction. The shadow on this side will be deeper than it is on this side. So that's one thing I have to bear in mind. Not quite sure how much of an effect it will be. Again, it really depends on whether this is bright sunlight or whether it's bright moonlight. Moonlight, the shadow will be a lot more subtler. Okay. Well, it depends on how complex an object you start to stream and what it is you're streaming as well. Artwork seems to be better streaming wise because there's not a lot of changes going on at the same time. It's not like a game where the frame is changing every other frame, and so the PC is having to work really hard to get it into a stream. So broadcasting just from a camera does tend to be a little bit easier on things, or from like a screen capture of a drawing program, something like that. One of the tricks also is just you can also turn your preview. When you stream, you've got the dashboard, and on your dashboard is generally a copy of your stream coming back at you. They describe it as a preview, but it's what everybody else is seeing. Turning that off so that you're not rendering, you're not displaying a stream at the same time as generating one, can help a lot as well. Crazy Joe 471, hello, good evening, and welcome to the studio. Now that depends on the definition of rich. There are lots and lots of definitions of rich. I'm able to produce what I think are very beautiful art forms, so in that respect, yes, I'm rich. Charles No 7, thank you very much for following. I really appreciate you doing that. It's great. Thank you very much. Crazy Joe, you're being strange. If you want to be strange, you might be better doing it in a different stream. Remember that text doesn't make jokes very easy. If you are joking, it's probably quite difficult to represent that in text language. If you'd like to stay around, you're quite welcome, but try not to be strange. No, well, thank you, Chosen 7, but thank you. I enjoy the fact that people want to follow to come back and see other things. It's really nice to know that what you're doing, at least some people like to watch. Okay, gotta get up into this area around here now to lighten the motor up. Okay, so you're going quite well tonight. That stone is going to get lost if I'm not careful, so what I'm going to just do is, it's just in the light area, so just lighten that up a little bit to find the edge, so it kind of stands out a little bit. We've probably got the shadow is somewhere around there, so probably got the limit of the shadow sort of around this sort of area. So that's just in. It's not bad. These two areas just around here look a little odd. They're a bit too dark compared with what's going on down here. So I think you need to add a little bit of light to those. And we'll see how that goes. I'm going to be a little bit careful. I don't want to add a lot because it will just stand out. So just being a little bit careful, just a few scratches. I can add more. It's not as easy to take them away. It involves getting a bottle of ink out and a paintbrush. That looks okay. That looks better. Now you can sort of see there's a shadow-ish effect down that edge there. And the mortar seems to reflect the shadow, reflect the brightness of the shadow as well, in that it's brighter away from that was almost a second edge, but it should be sort of visible. It is kind of visible here, but it's Scraperboard is often an art form which is better more than sort of 8 to 10 inches away. If you're about 2 feet looking back, you don't see the individual scratches quite so much, you see it more as a whole picture. I rather like a lot of pencil drawings sometimes, where if you get too close and you can see the individual lines, it doesn't look as good as if you step back a little bit. So I think most of the stuff of the mortaring is perhaps done, or at least at this moment. We may come back and do some more on it as changes to other areas may dictate. I'm going to be doing a path and possibly grass down here, which I may colour green as well. And when we do that, it may well mean that to achieve the right look between a path and the cottage, we might have to change some of the contrast. So we may have to make the cottage a little bit brighter, which may involve us going back. And some of these stones I may add a little bit more texture to, or a little bit more highlights, as though they're just catching the light on certain of their planes a lot better, because they are of course quite a rough surface. And some stones may contain a little bit of mica, for example, which will suddenly just catch a flash of light. This area just around these stones up here at the top is a little bit too dark mortar wise. I may also end up deciding that I'd like this edge, the shadow edge around this area here as well, to be a little bit more prominent. You can see it at the moment, but I might decide I want it a little bit more prominent, especially if I make this a bright sunny day, for example. That shadow would be a lot darker, and if I don't make it a lot darker, it possibly wouldn't look quite right. The way I make it look darker without getting ink out and inking over the top is to make the rest of it look lighter. So again, we may come back onto this and do some other work, but it's not looking too bad. I can see an area around here that wants to be just a touch bright. I don't want to lose this stone. I really like the way that those stones texture just works. It happened almost by accident. Well, it did happen by accident, I suppose. And I'd like to keep it. So I'm trying not to make this mortar just around this edge here, such that you can't see the edge of the stone. Well, that looks okay. I now see a small area just under here. That is also a little dark. So this is only, and I need therefore to define just the edge of that stone a little bit. I'm only adding, well, in some cases, little tiny scratches, but that is enough to make quite a bit of difference to the way in which something shows up. Okay, well, that still is a bit dark around there, but I think I'm going to leave that. One of the effects of that, leaving that, is it looks as though the mortar is a little bit deeper. Now, in fact, that probably means I should define the edge of this stone just a little bit more accurately. Because if the mortar's deeper, obviously it's not overlapping the stone, so that you'll see the actual stone edge itself. So sometimes it can be just about little details like that which can finish off an artwork. Now this wants to be this is a little bit odd across here as well, so I'm just going to add a little bit more brightness in that area, and just make the edge of that stone just a little bit more visible. Still a bit dark. That's better. Now I'm looking at it and I can see the same thing on the other side. Sort of giving the impression that it's like a crack, it's breaking away a little bit. I'm not sure I want that. So I'm working very well. I'm working slowly around here because I'm literally adding scratches one at a time. So I can place them exactly. So what I'm trying to do is not widen an existing scratch. I literally want to come between scratches to add more in. That way I can add a little bit more brightness to it without impacting on the edge of the stone that's on this side here. You'll still see the stone as being there. See, the other thing about it is the light direction is this way, so naturally this edge of the stone would be the lightest, and on the motorwise as well, and I don't really want to do that, so I'm trying to sort of avoid that as much as possible. I just add a little bit more around the edge of the stone, just a tiny amount, but it just provides a little bit lighter edge, which I can then add a few more mortar scratches in to bring that brightness up a little bit without hiding the stone. I think that's about doing it. No, it's okay. Chose no 7. I don't require anybody to watch, so yeah, I do understand people are busy doing other things, probably watching other streams at the same time. It's something that I do, so yeah, if I say something and you haven't answered, then I'm not forcing you to talk, so I quite understand. I am seeing this area around here not quite right, just around there, although I do want this shadow edge. It's a little bit dark, possibly still up here as well, just in that area there. Yeah, so just around that stone. Sometimes with this, because of the way in which effectively you're scratching a V into the black of the and into the underlying china clay. So sometimes you get an effect where you look at it from one direction, you'll see one thing, and if you change it to a different direction, you'll see a different thing, because you're seeing into that V, and light's bouncing off that V from different directions. And so quite literally, sometimes if I'm working on a piece like this and I'm working along, and it'll look to me as though it's the right colour shade, and I'll turn the piece like this and I'll go, nope, that's completely wrong, it's too dark usually, just because of the way in which the light is being affected by the angle of the scratch. Sometimes you end up going, well, actually I'm not going to see it at this angle, so the angle I want it to be right at is the right way up, so to speak, and then you just deal with it around there. But it is something you've kind of got to bear in mind, although it's easier to work it with the board in some directions. You do have to keep looking at it from the natural direction just to make sure. Sometimes you can be looking at things like this and you just go, oh, I've missed it, and as you look around you just see more and more bits that you didn't quite do as you thought you'd done. Like just now as I'm going, I'm just going through, and just as I move I go, I missed that bit, and okay, let's have a look at that. That's looking quite nice now. Well, of course, Chosen 07, I kind of encourage you to do so. I mean, I I encourage everybody to try art and have a go at doing it. It's I've got a dark area down here. I think it's fun to do. Most people can do art as long as they realise that it takes practice and they don't expect something of the quality of Rembrandt on their very first try. I'm sure there may be the odd person that can achieve that, but for most people it needs practice, and they've got to not get discouraged, and then they do improve. But anybody who has an interest, I always try and encourage everybody to at least try and have a practice. You could kind of have a practice at doing this electronically as well, Chosen 07, because you start with a black canvas and use like a 1 2 3 pixel wide brush on a maybe a couple of thousand pixels wide image, and you'll have something of a similar sort of effect, shall we say. Use pure white on black, and as I say, so maybe a 1 to 3 pixel brush, or pencil if you like, painting white, or you could maybe have a slightly wider one to represent a wider tool, like this one would be wider, maybe 5 pixels, and 10 pixels type of thing. So you can simulate the different tools and just have a practice like that as well. So that's an idea. I might try that. That's a good philosophy to have. A lot of people don't, though. They'll get very frustrated because they see an image in their mind, and if they see an image, they can think they can produce it. I'm still guilty of that, and I've had lots of practice at not being able to achieve that, but I recognise what I'm doing now. But in the past it has put me off not being able to actually achieve what I want. And one of the daft things is that something like this, for example, I might have had in my mind and wouldn't have been able to achieve it because I went about it the wrong way. I'd start at this end and try and do a realistic stone and add another one on, and so on. And it's really hard to do that sort of thing. The way this has started was it was a rough outline, scratched, and I want a bit of thatch on here, and I want stones, and the stones were really roughly scratched in, and then I've gone back and refined it, and I've come up with something so far that I'm quite pleased with, which previously I wouldn't have thought I'd ever be able to do. The portrait, which was the very first thing that I did in Scraperboard, and I looked at it, and even whilst I was doing it I had no idea how I was going to finish it, but I just kept working little bits, and all of a sudden there was none left to do, and I kind of surprised myself. Yeah, so sometimes even when you know that you have philosophy, it's still hard sometimes. So I can understand for beginners, real beginners that have never picked up an art tool before, sometimes that it's a hard lesson to learn sometimes. Okay, I just said there was this area down here which is a little bit dark, and I can see it now. I would say if you yeah, you're right, it does. I kind of when I did John Miles' the portrait, it was kind of wow, I've actually managed to do this, and it looks good, and to me it looks like who it's supposed to be. My wife recognised who it was as well, so it wasn't a bad likeness. One of the things I was going to say, if you do decide to have another go at Scraperboard Chosen 07, is if you're starting with, if you're getting some blank boards to start with, for example, or well, yeah, because if you buy kits, they come with tips. These, I have found that these go, blunt's not quite the right word, shall we say ineffective, relatively quickly. So it's worth having maybe getting a couple of tips or a pack of tips if you use this sort of tool, and perhaps something like a honing stone. I'm using a small file, I'm a cheapskate, so this is kind of, whilst it's got a sharp point and I could hurt somebody with it, it's not scratching as well as I might like it to. So without putting a lot of force on the work, which then will create lines that are thicker than I want, something like a fine file maybe even some like emery paper would, well, emery paper would do the job just as well, sheet of emery paper, which you can put flat down on the desk and just rub the pen on it. I found as being really good for just restoring that really sharp point that creates scratches really easily without having to replace the tip, because the tips, I forgot what a pack of 12, which is what these come in, is, but you know, it's kind of like this. There's nothing, you know, and fundamentally there's nothing wrong with that. It's still quite a sharp tip, but it's not as sharp as one that's never been used, and yet you know, it seems a bit silly to throw it away, and that's where I discovered using a file and emery paper, which I've just thought of, which I might have to get some out because that's a really good idea. Can just restore that fine point. It doesn't take much, it's just something like that. It's enough, and now it will scratch really sharply on here, and therefore create really nice fine lines. And just to check whether it does, have I got, no, I've still got a little bit of darkness around there, which is just around that stone. Surprising just how little difference there needs to be for something to stand out as being of a different shade. And it's not something that you have to be extremely precise about. It's just about looking. So I've just added a few scratches. Wasn't particularly precise about them. I just was a little bit careful about where I put them, trying to just go between other areas where you hadn't scratched before. And now that looks okay. So, you know, whilst I'm, for people who might want to try this, well, it looks like I'm being really, you know, precise about something. You know, I'm taking a lot of time to do it. It's not because it's difficult to do. It's because I want to just be a little bit careful that I don't go over the top. So I'm taking my time. Now this end wall, the mortar as a whole is slightly darker than it is from these around these two walls here. But in actual fact, to me, as I'm looking at this now, that looks right. Okay. Theory says this ought to be brighter than this area to make it stand forward. But it already looks like it stood forward because of this edge, and therefore the fact that it's not brighter isn't actually bothering me. It still looks like it stood forward, and it looks like it's 3D because the mortar isn't quite as prominent, I guess, as it is around here. So this is further in the background, and it looks slightly flatter because there's less contrast to what is here. So it's worked out quite well. It's accidental, I freely admit that, or if you like, I haven't done as much work on it yet to do that, but I'm looking at it and going, this is a Bob Ross moment. It's a happy accident. I'll probably leave it like that because I think it looks okay. Yeah, that's right, Chosen 07. It is. And it's more honing than sharpening as such. It's not. I mean, I'm not taking off reams of material. I was at one point doing it with a leather strop. It was just what's the word? It's a leather strop that I use for sharpening my chisels. Only because of the way I was doing it, it was disrupting the surface of that leather strop, which I didn't want to do. because I use it for sharpening chisels. So I switched to using the file, but then the emery paper came to mind. And if you're used to sharpening a knife blade, if you have a honing stone, the same thing would do, just a couple of passes, I'm fairly sure. Have I heard of a brand called Engraving Art Rainbow? I have a feeling I have, and the name suggests that what they do is they've produce boards where it's rainbow colours, which is just foil, which produces very interesting effects. Then there's no getting away from it. It's different if that's what it is, but they can look really, really effective, and certain subjects also suit that sort of thing as well. For example, if you had that sort of board, doing a parrot, for example, would suit a rainbow board. If it's something different to that, then I probably have not. But there are a few different manufacturers of board like this. So it's and in different parts of the world. So I don't know where you're from, Chose 07, but it could be a brand that's common around whatever part of the world you're in. The one that's common here in the UK seems to be SD. I think. Let me have a look at what this kit one is I've got. Yeah, you see, this one's completely different. This apparently is a Dalmatian by Crafty Kids. So I'm going to be a crafty kid. But I got this. Yeah, I only just qualify for ages 8+. I got this given as a Christmas present, so I'm going to have to do it at some point. But it's yeah, they've done this, or they've arranged this. It looks like by doing long scratch lines in various thicknesses, or even just long scratch lines are either there or not there. But again, as I say, with something like this, there's nothing to stop you doing it in your own style as well. Okay, water theme with a fish. Yeah, it'd make for some nice colourful. Yeah, it seems like a tropical fish type of thing. That would look quite nice, I think, in that sort of rainbow foil. Yeah. It's interesting. I've sort of looked at the rainbow, the holographic, and thought, what on earth can I do with that? But now that I'm talking to you and anybody else who's watching, it's amazing how the ideas come. And you've just said they're fish, and I'd never thought of fish, but it kind of makes sense, which is also really daft because I've got a PC at the end of my desk here, which I airbrushed myself, which has got tropical fish on it, which are colourful fish. And it never occurred to me. That's interesting. Anyway, unfortunately, unfortunately, I've completed a section there. I think at least to be able to say we can leave it for now, and we may or may not come back to it depending on what goes on. I do know I need to do some more work on the thatch itself. It's got a look which is more moonlit at the moment than sunlight. I still haven't decided for certain what I want, but for sunlit it's a bit dark. For moonlit it looks just right. So I guess at some point fairly soon, before I do any work on the roof, I do have to make that decision. I think what I might do is ground this, do a path around the edge here, probably from edge to edge, and maybe some grass. And then at that point, one of the things I did want to do is I've got coloured ink, which is supposedly specially designed for working on scratchboards and clayboard and scraperboard and scratchboard, whatever various titles there are. And I've got some green in there. Now that, unless I mix it, that green is daylight green for grass. I'd have to darken it down considerably for moonlit grass. But if depending on if I use that to colour the grass, which is something I'd quite like to try, and it seems an appropriate thing, not colour the whole cottage, just a little bit down here at the front, just to throw a little bit of colour into it. Then if I do it that colour straight out the bottle, which might be easier to start with for the very first time of using it, that probably will dictate its sunlight. And if that's sunlight, then we probably need to make this this roof a little bit brighter than it is at the moment, and possibly make these shadows a little bit more prominent. Kind of reluctant in that they look quite good, and it would mean raising the whole level of brightness across the whole wall. I'm less keen on doing that. Can do it, but I'm less keen on doing that. And the other bit that does need some work on this is the windows. At the moment they'd be okay for a night scene. Again, because there'd be very little reflections. They're set deep into the walls, so the fact they're black would be okay on a night scene. But if it's going to be a day scene, they need to be a grey at the very least. And possibly even picking up a bit of reflection of grass, so maybe a little bit of light green into them. So that's kind of my thoughts about moving it forward. But actually I now keep a notebook on screen of ideas for future streams, and that might be one of them, although I don't have any rainbow scratchboard. I'd have to get some to do that, and I've got some copper, silver and gold foil scratchboard to use first, and plus I think I've got another 8 sheets of this, and I'm trying not to spend too much money on art. The only problem now with streaming is I literally do art every day for 2 hours, and before I started streaming, I maybe did, in the 3 months before I started streaming, I probably did about half an art piece. And over about the past couple of years, I've done no more than about 2 or 3. Since I've started streaming, I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm still counting. Shall we say at least 9 things that I can think of. So it's getting a little bit expensive, but I'm enjoying doing the art, so I'm trying to save up and not buy too many things. I've got a kit of not perla, but the same sort of fuse beads over at the other side of the room, which I got because I've seen a few people do it. That sort of art form interested me. I love working with pixels. So monochrome and pixels to try at some point as well, and I know that can get expensive if I really like doing that as well. Buying enough of those beads to do, because I would like to do photo type pictures as opposed to sprites and things, then I know that's going to get expensive, so trying to save up. Maritz, me boy, thank you very much, that's very kind of you. Absolex, and also thank you very much. Welcome both of you to the studio this evening. Unfortunately, you've caught me just wrapping up for this evening. I've been streaming now since approximately 8 p.m. in the UK. That's just over 2 hours ago. I've come to a point of where it's useful to stop this for this evening before we move on to another section tomorrow. And I was just giving an overview of what my thoughts were on what to do next on this. So it probably will be the pathway, I think, that I want to put in, which provides a ground for this, so it's no longer sitting in mid-air. It actually looks like it's attached to something, which will make it look, which will make it look a lot more natural when you're looking at it. So yeah, well, what I was about to say is my usual advert, which includes when I'm going to be live. So the usual advert goes something along the lines of those people who are watching. If you're not following me, then I would certainly be pleased if you did so, if you wanted to do so, because of course Twitch in theory will notify you by email when I go live, or if you have Turbo, I believe it can even send you an SMS message. But the iOS and Android apps will actually ping you, and not, the chortle when somebody goes live. So very useful addition if you don't already have the apps. Otherwise, you're quite welcome to follow me on Twitter as well. I tweet when I go live, not when I have my breakfast. And Maritz, my boy, there just proved, thank you very much, that following is a good idea. Thank you very much, Maritz, my boy. I am really surprised I can say your name without too much of a problem. But thank you very much for following. I do enjoy having you guys and knowing that you want to come back and take another look. As I was saying, Twitter will also obviously notify you, because I tweet when I go live. Any tweets that are stream or art related, I don't tweet about other things. But if you'd just like to try and catch me, I do, other than for family events, I do stream 7 nights a week from 8 p.m. in the UK. That's 1900 hours GMT, or roughly wherever you are in the world. Take a quick look at a clock. I'm sure there's one around where you are at the moment, and subtract 2 hours 10 minutes. That would be 8 p.m. in the UK. So that time tomorrow and subsequent nights is when I stream. Next few nights is going to be continuing with this Scraperboard. Once this is complete, we'll move on to another art form, which will be Punchcraft, for probably about 5 or 6 streams before moving on to something else. Anyway, thank you very much, guys, for being around. Chosen, yes, you're right, for both. It can get expensive cumulatively, but yes, you're right, it definitely is worth it. And oh, my name is, okay, that's a clever way of doing it. So my name is it sounds sense to me, or is that the Dutch way of saying what you said? My name is boy. Just interested. But yeah, thank you, and sorry you didn't get to see much of it. Hopefully you'll see more on either tomorrow or another evening when I'm streaming. Anyway, guys, time for me to go. Soon be my bedtime. I'm getting old. Thank you very much. See you again later. Bye bye.